She called the cops because I was moving out. Not fighting, not threatening, just moving boxes. But that wasn't the craziest part. This woman thought she owned the entire neighborhood, and she acted like it too. Fines, surveillance, threats. Until one morning, when I decided to test her limits. What started as a quiet exit turned into something way bigger and way riskier than I planned. Let's just say when I reached into my wallet, she stopped talking. Fast. You're watching QA stories, and this isn't just about rules, it's about control. Ever had a neighbor like that? Drop your story in the comments. I'm reading. I'm Nick Morgan, 32 years old, and honestly, I never thought I'd be the guy telling a story like this. I used to be an FBI agent until I got tired of dealing with bureaucratic nonsense and retired early to do security consulting. Good money, flexible schedule, and all I wanted was peace and quiet in some small community where I could tend a garden and mind my own business. I'm not even sure why I thought moving to a rural neighborhood with an HOA would give me that peace. But here we are. I chose this little wooden cabin on a gravel dirt road, complete with white picket fences and mature trees everywhere. It looked perfect for someone who just wanted to disappear from the world for a while and figure out what came next in life. Moving to a new place is always stressful, but I figured the worst part would be unpacking boxes and learning where the nearest grocery store was located. Enter Diane Anderson, 53 years old, blonde hair teased to perfection, like she never left 1985, and a former office manager who got fired for being, well, let's call it overly controlling. Now she channels all that energy into being HO, a president, and let me tell you this, woman treats the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. I should have known I was in trouble the moment I met her, but honestly, I thought she was just being thorough. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut when every instinct told me this woman was going to be a problem. But you know how it is when you're trying to be the polite new neighbor. You give people the benefit of the doubt, even when red flags are practically slapping you in the face. Moving day arrives, and my truck barely parks on the gravel road when she appears out of nowhere, like some kind of neighborhood surveillance system. No, hello, no, welcome to the community, no, need any help with those boxes? Just this, trucks over 8 tons aren't allowed on this road. You'll damage the gravel. My truck was 4 tons. The road was clearly built for vehicles much larger than mine, but I stayed polite because I'm new here and figured maybe I misunderstood something. No problem, I'll be quick. I told her thinking that would be the end of it. Boy, was I wrong about that. The emails came non-stop before I'd even unpacked my first box. She'd hit me with 3 separate complaints each, pettier than the last. By day 3, it felt less like a move and more like an audit. I kept thinking this has to be a joke, right? Maybe she's just really passionate about property values and things will settle down once I get everything organized. I wasn't trying to cause trouble or make waves. I just wanted to live quietly and maybe grow some tomatoes without anyone bothering me about it. Day 5, she knocks on my door and points at my small potted plant by the white picket fence. This disrupts the clean fence line. It needs to be moved. I set the pot down slowly and looked her dead in the eyes, trying to see if she even registered how ridiculous this was. A 6-inch plant. At my fence. On land I signed for with my own hand. But to her it was rebellion. "It's just a flower pot," I said, still not quite believing we were having this conversation. "That's the standard, and you're out of alignment," she said, like she was reading off a zoning code she wrote herself. That's when I realized this wasn't about flower pots or aesthetics or community standards. This was about control, pure and simple. I didn't move the pot because honestly, what kind of person moves a flower pot because their neighbor doesn't like where it's sitting? Next day, another email. Violation notice, $50 fine for non-compliance. $50 for a flower pot on my own property. I actually had to read the email twice to make sure I wasn't missing something. I called her up and said, "Diane, this is getting ridiculous." Her response, "The HOA board voted. Pay the fine or face further penalties." And I'm still not sure if there actually was a board or if she just made decisions and called them votes. But at that point, I was starting to realize I might be dealing with someone who had completely lost touch with reality. Here's where it got personal, and I mean really personal. I had this beautiful maple tree in front of my cabin, the main reason I fell in love with the place. Been there for decades, probably older than both Diane and me combined. One morning I wake up to chainsaws. Workers are cutting my tree. I run outside in my pajamas yelling, "What are you doing?" and there's Diane standing with a clipboard like she's supervising some kind of military operation. Multiple residents complained. The tree blocks sight lines and disrupts the cabin's proportions. I watched my tree, the tree that made me choose this place, getting butchered by strangers while she stood there looking satisfied. That tree wasn't just part of the view, it was part of my father's design. He taught me how to prune it when I was 12. Losing it felt like losing one more piece of him, like Diane had reached into my memories and cut straight through them. I stood there helpless, but inside something hardened. "You can't just cut down my tree," I told her, and I wish I could say I kept my cool. But come on, who wouldn't snap at that? I can when it violates community standards. The work order was approved, she said, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. Standing there watching branches fall, something clicked in my brain. This wasn't about aesthetics or rules or community standards. This was about a woman who needed to dominate everyone around her, and I had somehow become her latest project. I looked at Diane standing there with her satisfied smile, watching my tree get destroyed, and made a decision that would change everything. "You know what, Diane? You want to play games? Let's play games." She didn't know it yet, but she had just picked a fight with exactly the wrong person. That night, I sat in my cabin looking at the mutilated tree through my window, and honestly, I didn't know if what I was planning was justice, revenge, or something far bigger than either of us. After the tree incident, instead of backing off like any reasonable person would, Diane got worse. Way worse. Daily emails now, and I'm talking about the most ridiculous complaints you've ever heard in your life. Violation for non-uniform shrub symmetry. Citation because my rain gutters were insufficiently matte. She even flagged a disruptive mailbox shadow pattern at 3:17 p.m. The penalties stacked $25 here, $75 there. It was less a list of fines and more a slow bleed, and she knew exactly where to press. She was literally trying to fine me into submission, and the crazy part is, I think it had worked on other people before me. I wasn't sure if I was overreacting or if this woman had genuinely lost her mind, but the evidence was piling up that it was definitely the latter. The sheer volume of these complaints was staggering. I'd never seen anything like it in my entire career, and I'd dealt with some pretty unreasonable people in federal law enforcement. What really got me was the precision of her documentation. Timestamps, photo angles, detailed measurements, like she was conducting a forensic investigation into my property's ability to exist peacefully in her neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson, the 70-year-old next door, whispered to me while watering her roses one morning. "She did the same thing to the previous family that lived where you are now. They moved out last year." Same thing. I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Started with little complaints. Ended with them getting so many fines they couldn't afford to stay. I asked if anyone ever stood up to her. Mrs. Patterson looked around like she was afraid the trees might be listening. "One man tried," she said. "Veteran, proud guy. Next thing we knew, his shed got condemned by the HOA and his permits revoked. He left in the middle of the night." That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with a busybody. I was up against a system. And maybe Diane wasn't even the whole problem. That's when I realized this was Diane's actual strategy, a systematic campaign of harassment designed to break people down. Make life so miserable that people either submit completely or leave. And apparently it had been working for years. I started wondering how many families had been driven out by this woman's manufactured crises and imaginary violations. The veteran story especially bothered me, someone who had served his country, getting driven out by a woman with a clipboard and an attitude problem. I'm a former FBI agent, so I know how to read regulations and spot when someone's overstepping their authority. I pulled up our actual HO, bylaws that weekend, and spent hours going through every single page, cross-referencing every single complaint Diane had sent me. Guess what? Half the rules Diane was enforcing didn't exist anywhere in writing. The grass height limit, not in the bylaws. Mailbox color requirements, nowhere to be found. Garden hose visibility standards. Complete fiction. She was literally making up rules and hoping people wouldn't check, and someone this controlling would eventually cross the line into completely making things up. But the sophistication of her deception was actually impressive. She'd created an entire parallel set of regulations that existed only in her head. I started making a spreadsheet, documenting every fake rule, every bogus fine, every manufactured violation. This woman had been running a con game on the entire neighborhood, and nobody had bothered to verify her authority, because they assumed someone in an official position must be following actual rules. Week 3, I catch Diane in my yard with a camera photographing my cabin from different angles, like she's documenting a crime scene. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level, even though I was pretty furious about finding someone trespassing on my property. "Documenting violations for the monthly HOA report," she said, like this was the most normal thing in the world. "Get off my property," I told her. "The HOA has the right to inspect for compliance," she replied, still taking pictures. I pulled out my phone and started recording her. "Show me where in the bylaws it says you can trespass on private property." She couldn't answer because it wasn't there, because most of what she was doing was completely illegal. The way she continued taking photos even after I'd asked her to leave told me everything I needed to know about her respect for actual property rights versus her made-up HOA authority. That evening, I get another email that made my blood pressure spike. "Mr. Morgan, your hostile attitude toward HOA leadership is creating a negative community environment. This behavior must cease immediately." Hostile attitude. For asking her not to trespass on my property, I reread the email. Then again. As if logic might appear the third time. It didn't. The language was so formal, so official sounding, but underneath it was just a tantrum from someone who'd been told no for the first time in years. I realized something important about Diane that night. She wasn't just power hungry, she was used to people being intimidated by her. She'd probably never dealt with someone who actually knew the rules and wasn't afraid to call her out on her nonsense. Most people would have lost their temper by now, yelled at her, made threats, given her all the ammunition she needed to play victim. But I had a different idea brewing. What if instead of getting angry, I got strategic? What if I let Diane think she was winning, let her get overconfident, and then watched her overplay her hand? In the FBI, we called this giving them enough rope. Let someone dig their own hole deep enough, and eventually they'll bury themselves without you having to do much at all. Next morning, I moved the flower pot. Exactly 1 inch. Diane noticed immediately, like she had been watching my property with binoculars. "That's still too close to the fence," she said. "How close is acceptable?" I asked. "At least 3 feet from any property line." 3 feet, for a 6-inch pot. I moved it again, and somehow she found another complaint. That's when I understood the pattern completely. No matter what I did, it would never be enough. She needed someone to control, someone to push around, and the flower pot was never the real issue. This was about establishing dominance, making sure I knew who was in charge. Every inch I gave her just proved I could be pushed around, which meant she'd keep pushing until I either broke or fought back. The final email of that week really sealed it for me. "Mr. Morgan, you have 48 hours to bring your property into full compliance or face legal action through the HOA. Legal action, over a flower pot and some made-up rules that didn't exist in any official document." I stared at that email for a long time, and honestly, most people would panic at that point. Some would get a lawyer, others would just give up and move. But I had spent years dealing with petty bureaucrats who thought a little authority made them untouchable, and the Bureau taught me exactly how to handle people like that. Diane thought she held all the cards because she had a title and a clipboard. What she didn't realize was that she'd just threatened someone who knew exactly how to research her claims, document her behavior, and expose her entire operation. What if I stopped reacting and started leading her exactly where I wanted her to go? The day after Diane's legal action threat, I'm outside assessing the damage to my maple tree when this young guy approaches from the house next door. "Hey, I am Kevin. I live in the blue house. I saw what happened with your tree." Kevin's maybe 22, college age. It seems nervous, but genuine in a way that made me think he might actually be someone I could trust in this neighborhood, full of people too scared to speak up. "Yeah, that was fun," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "You deal with her much?" I was curious to know if I was the only target or if this was part of a larger pattern of behavior that had been going on longer than I realized. Something about Kevin's approach told me he'd been watching this situation unfold and had his own thoughts about Diane's methods. "Unfortunately," Kevin said, and I could hear real frustration in his voice. "She flagged my back deck as a modern eyesore. I showed her the permit, and that shut her up, for now." That got my attention immediately. Kevin looked like the kind of guy who wouldn't hurt a fly, so if Diane was going after him too, then this really was a pattern of behavior, and not just some personal vendetta against me specifically. It made me wonder just how many people in this neighborhood were walking on eggshells, afraid to do anything that might attract her attention. The fact that Kevin had actually fought back, even in a small way, suggested he might be willing to do more if the situation called for it. "Want to see something interesting?" Kevin asked, and he showed me a folder, not some massive legal brief, just the original HOA documents from when the neighborhood was built. He had the receipts, and I mean literal ones. Permit codes, dated expense reports, all underlined and annotated like a case file. "I figured as much," I said. "What else you got?" That's when Kevin pulled out what would become the foundation for everything that happened next. This kid wasn't just complaining about Diane, he'd been systematically documenting her behavior like a proper investigation. I was impressed. Kevin had done basic research that any college student could do, county records, original neighborhood plans, public documents that anyone could access if they bothered to look. "Look at this." He pointed to a financial summary. "The HOA collects $200 per month from each house. Know what our expenses actually are. Maybe $50 per house for road maintenance and landscaping." "Where's the rest going?" I asked, though I was starting to have some pretty strong suspicions. "Great question," Kevin said, and I could tell he had been wondering the same thing. "The math was simple enough. If you're collecting 4 times what you're spending on legitimate expenses, where's that extra money going? Either Diane was the worst financial manager in HOA history, or something else was happening here." I wasn't looking to destroy Diane's life, or expose some massive conspiracy at that point. I just wanted her to stop harassing me and everyone else in the neighborhood who was trying to live peacefully. "Kevin, you seem like a smart kid. Want to help me with a little social experiment?" "What kind of experiment?" he asked, and I could see he was intrigued but cautious. "Let's see how far Diane will go when she thinks she's about to lose control." Kevin grinned, and for a second I saw the spark of someone who had been waiting for this fight. We pulled out my whiteboard. Yes, I travel with one, and started mapping psychological triggers. Diane thrived on certainty, predictability, dominance. So, we'd give her uncertainty silence and just enough bait to believe she was still winning. Step 1, false withdrawal. Step 2, shift her focus to me. Step 3, evidence gathering under her nose. Kevin took notes like he was in a graduate course on psychological warfare, which, in a way, he was. The strategy was simple, nothing that required special expertise or complicated legal maneuvering. "I don't need you to be a legal expert or investigator," I told Kevin. "Just help me document things. Take photos, save emails, be a witness." That's it. That's it. Sometimes the simplest plans work best. But Kevin was already thinking ahead. What if we can get her to escalate publicly? Like really lose her temper in front of other neighbors? I liked where his head was at. This wasn't just about stopping Diane from harassing me. It was about showing the entire community who she really was underneath all that official authority. In the days that followed, our trap took shape. Kevin and I choreographed every move, the boxes, the loud phone calls, the gossip cues. We weren't just moving, we were baiting. I called a moving company, making sure to talk loudly near my window where Diane could hear. Ordered some moving boxes that I left visible on my porch. Started having conversations about looking at other neighborhoods whenever I saw neighbors outside. It didn't take long for word to get back to Diane, and her reaction was exactly what I hoped for. Kevin positioned himself to observe and document, creating a timeline of Diane's responses to my apparent moving preparations. The woman was so predictable, it was almost sad threatened her control, and she'd immediately try to reassert it through manipulation. Day 3, Diane was suddenly very interested in my well-being. Phone call. "Nick, I heard you might be moving. I hope it's not because of any misunderstandings we've had." Misunderstandings. That's what she called systematic harassment and illegal fines. "Just exploring my options, Diane," I told her, trying to sound resigned rather than angry. "Well, I'd hate to see you go. Maybe we can work out any issues you have." For the first time since I'd moved in, Diane was being nice to me. Not because she'd changed or suddenly developed empathy, but because she was scared of losing control over her favorite victim. Kevin was listening from his yard, documenting this complete personality shift for our growing file. "Kevin," I said later that day, "she's more predictable than I thought." Kevin started keeping a simple log, dates, times, what Diane said or did. Nothing fancy, just facts. Meanwhile, I kept up the fake moving preparation. More phone calls, more boxes, more house hunting conversations that I made sure happened where the neighborhood gossip network would pick them up. We were feeding Diane exactly what we wanted her to hear, and she was responding exactly as we'd predicted. It was like watching someone follow a script they didn't know they'd been handed. By week's end, Diane was calling daily. Any way I can help you feel more comfortable here? Maybe we can adjust some of the guidelines. Guidelines, not rules. She was already backing down from her previous position, and I could tell she was getting desperate. Kevin and I met each evening to review the day's interactions, building a comprehensive picture of how Diane operated when she felt threatened. You know what, Kevin, I think our neighborhood queen is about to show everyone exactly who she really is. What do you mean? Kevin asked. The desperation in Diane's voice was becoming more obvious each day. I thought I understood how people like Diane operated, but I'd underestimated how fast power crumbles when it starts to slip. Saturday morning, 8 a.m. Perfect moving day weather, and Kevin and I had been planning this for a week. The rental truck arrived small, one perfectly legal size. Nothing that could possibly violate any real HOA rules. I start loading boxes while making sure to be visible from Diane's house, and most of these boxes were empty because this whole thing was theater designed to get Diane to show her true colors. You know, I've shared stories like this before on QA Stories, but I've never been in the middle of one myself. And let me tell you, it's a completely different experience when you're the one trying to stay calm while someone loses their mind at you. Sure enough, 10 minutes in, I see Diane's curtains moving. She's watching, probably taking notes, definitely planning her next move. But she wasn't the only one. I noticed blinds shifting 2 houses down. Mr. Jensen across the street had paused his leaf blower mid-task. Even the mail carrier hesitated before sliding envelopes into my box. The neighborhood wasn't watching a movie, they were watching a confrontation unfold in slow motion. Kevin's positioned at his house, documenting everything with his phone, not hiding, just being a good neighbor, recording what he thinks is a normal moving day. But both of us know this is about to become anything but normal. Within an hour, Diane appears, but this isn't the aggressive Diane from before. This is concerned neighbor Diane, the version of herself she trots out when she needs to manipulate someone. Nick, that's unfortunate timing. I was just preparing a revised compliance offer for you, she says, and I have to give her credit, she almost sounds like she's been working on a solution. Yeah, found a great place across town. Better for me, I tell her, trying to sound like someone who's been worn down by weeks of harassment and just wants to escape. I watch her face change as the reality hits her. Losing control of someone was clearly not in Diane's playbook, and you could see the panic starting to set in behind her eyes. But we never finished working out those minor issues. I'm sure we can compromise. Minor issues. A few weeks ago, they were serious violations requiring immediate correction. And now suddenly, they're minor issues we can compromise on. That can't be right, can it? I keep loading boxes, staying friendly but firm, because I want her to think I'm just tired of fighting, not that I'm setting a trap. I appreciate that, Diane, but I've already signed the lease elsewhere. That's when she really starts to panic. What if we waived some of the recent fines? Fresh start. She was literally offering to ignore her own rules to keep me under her control. I actually had to stop and stare at her after that one, because the woman who had been threatening legal action a week ago was now trying to bribe me to stay. Here's where Kevin and I got creative. One box clearly labeled HOA Records in big bold letters gets loaded where Diane can see it. Her eyes lock onto that box like a hawk spotting prey, and I swear I could see the gears turning in her head. She reached for her phone and took a single photo of the label of Kevin's face of me holding the lid open. Her hands trembled just slightly. She wasn't documenting us. She was archiving evidence for herself. What kind of HOA records? She asks, trying to sound casual but failing completely. Oh, just copies of bylaws, financial statements, correspondence. You know, normal stuff people keep when they move. What would you do back down to keep the peace, or keep pushing to see how far someone will go? That box changed everything. The mask dropped. No more neighborly concern. Only the HOA officer clinging to the last thread of her imagined authority. Now she was back to HOA president mode, and the mask was starting to slip. Residents aren't entitled to financial statements. That information is confidential. Actually, financial records are legally accessible to all homeowners. Basic transparency requirements. I told her, and I could see her starting to realize that maybe I knew more about the law than she'd assumed. Here's where Diane made her first real mistake. This information belongs to the board, not to individuals trying to weaponize it. Kevin's recording this whole conversation, capturing a clear attempt to prevent me from taking my own legally obtained documents. I'm not even sure there was a real HOA board at this point, but she was acting like she had some kind of government authority to control what documents I could take from my own house. "Diane, I'm not asking permission to take papers that belong to me," I said, and I could feel the situation escalating exactly the way I'd hoped it would. "Those papers contain sensitive community information," she practically shouted. "Like what landscaping contracts?" She couldn't answer because there was nothing sensitive about basic HOA finances, assuming they were legitimate in the first place. "Nick, if you remove confidential HOA materials from this community, there will be legal consequences," she threatened. And that's when I knew we had her. Legal consequences for taking publicly accessible documents from my own home. That's when Kevin walks over with perfect timing. "Hey, Nick, need help with that box? I've got copies of most of those same documents anyway." Diane's face goes white. She didn't know Kevin had been doing his own research. "Actually, Kevin, yeah. Let's make sure we have all the financial summaries for the past 2 years. Got 'em all, including the interesting expense reports," Kevin says. And I have to admire how well he's playing his part. Diane completely snaps at that point. "This is harassment. You can't collaborate to steal HOA property." "We're not stealing anything. These are public records," I tell her, staying calm while she loses it. "I'm calling the police," she screams. Kevin and I exchange glances. This is exactly what we hoped for Diane, so panicked about losing control that she'd call law enforcement over someone moving boxes out of their own house. "Diane, are you seriously calling the police because I'm moving out?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how she's going to justify this to herself. "You're violating HOA regulations and attempting to remove confidential materials," she says, like she actually believes the nonsense coming out of her mouth. She actually does it. Right there in front of everyone, Diane calls 911 to report her neighbor moving out of his own house. I'd set the stage for a controlled burn. But with Diane on the line and neighbors gathering behind hedges, I suddenly wondered if I'd underestimated how fast wildfire spreads. 20 minutes later, 2 patrol cars pull up, and Officers Davies and Wilson step out, looking like they're responding to a domestic dispute, not a moving truck situation. I'm thinking maybe I've pushed this too far. Maybe Diane's convinced them that something serious is happening here. Diane immediately rushes over to them, playing the victim perfectly, and I have to admit she's good at this. You'd almost believe her if you didn't know what had really been going on. "Officers, thank goodness you're here. This man is violating multiple HOA regulations and attempting to steal confidential community documents." She's got the whole act down, concerned community leader protecting the neighborhood from a dangerous resident, but as she rattled off code sections that didn't exist. Officer Davies quietly pulled out his phone and typed something. I saw his eyes flick to a website, then back to her. That was the moment I knew she'd lost the room. I actually had to stop myself from laughing, because the woman who'd been harassing me for weeks was now trying to make me look like the problem. Officer Davies looks at me, then at the truck, then back at Diane with this expression like he's trying to figure out what kind of emergency he's actually responding to. "Ma'am, can you explain what exactly the violation is?" "He's moving without proper HOA notification, and he's taken sensitive financial documents that belong to the community," Diane says. And I'm wondering if she actually believes this, or if she's just hoping the officers won't know the law. Officer Wilson walks over to me with a look that says he's dealt with neighborhood disputes before. "Sir, is this your residence?" "Yes, for the past 2 months." "And you're moving out?" "That was the plan." I'm trying to stay calm and let Diane dig her own hole, but honestly, having police called on you for moving your own stuff is surreal even when you're expecting it. Officer Davies starts asking the logical questions that any reasonable person would ask. "Ma'am, what's the legal requirement for HOA moving notification?" Diane fumbles around for an answer. "Well, it's residents must inform the board of any major changes." "Is that a legal requirement or an HOA guideline?" Officer Davies presses. "It's community policy," she says, like that means anything in a legal context. Kevin approaches with his folder, and I'm grateful to have someone backing me up with actual documentation. "Officers, I live next door. I have copies of our actual HOA bylaws. There's no moving notification requirement." Officer Wilson takes the folder and starts reading, and I can see him getting more confused about why he was called here in the first place. Diane's getting desperate now. "That boy doesn't understand HOA governance," I've been president for 3 years. Ma'am, HO, a president or not, you can't prevent someone from moving out of their own property. Officer Wilson says, and I can tell he's starting to see through her act. Looking back, I should have known this was the moment everything would change, but I was still focused on just getting through this without getting arrested. Officer Davies asks to see the confidential documents Diane was so worried about. I hand him the box, and he opens it to find copies of publicly available HOA financial statements, neighborhood bylaws, and basic community information. Ma'am, these appear to be standard homeowner documents. But they contain sensitive financial information, Diane insists, even though anyone could see that wasn't true. Officer Wilson looks up from Kevin's folder. Actually, HOA financial records are legally required to be accessible to all homeowners. This is basic transparency law. You can see the moment Diane realizes she's made a massive mistake. She called police to enforce rules that don't exist to prevent actions that are completely legal, and now she's standing here looking like someone who doesn't understand the most basic aspects of HOA governance. Officer Davies turns to me. Sir, do you have documentation showing you legally obtained these HOA records? This is it, the moment I've been building toward, and honestly, I'm still not sure if this is going to work or backfire spectacularly. I considered staying quiet, let the papers speak, let the footage Kevin had captured do its job. But I could see Diane's expression shifting, calculating. She thought this was still salvageable, that one strong rebuttal would win the crowd back. That's when I realized this needed to end here, visibly. Do you play it safe and just explain yourself, or do you show them exactly why messing with you was a mistake? I opened my wallet slowly, letting the badge rest against my palm for a full beat before turning it toward them. It wasn't the badge that stopped the moment, it was the silence after. Officer, I'm Nick Morgan, retired FBI agent. These documents were obtained through standard homeowner requests, which I processed according to federal transparency requirements. The air snapped. Officers straightened. Diane shrank by a full inch without moving. Officers Davies and Wilson both straighten up, recognizing legitimate federal credentials, and suddenly everything about this situation looks different. Diane's face goes from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in about 5 seconds. She stepped backward, just once, just enough for her heel to catch the curb behind her. She didn't fall, but the wobble said everything. This wasn't control anymore. It was panic pretending to be posture. FBI agent, you said you were retired, she stammers. I am retired. But FBI agents don't lose their federal authority just because they stop working full-time cases. I explain, which isn't entirely accurate, but close enough for this situation. Officer Wilson's response tells me everything I need to know. Mr. Morgan, are you saying there may be compliance issues with this HOA's record, keeping FBI agents have authority to investigate potential federal violations? I'm saying that any HOA attempting to restrict homeowner access to legally required documents raises significant red flags, yes. I reply, watching Diane's world crumble in real time. Officer Davies is taking notes now. Miss Anderson, we're going to need to ask you some questions about HOA document policies and financial record accessibility. Mr. Morgan's FBI credentials give weight to these concerns. This is harassment. I'm being attacked by a federal agent, Diane shouts, but nobody's buying it anymore. Ma'am, Mr. Morgan isn't attacking anyone. He's moving out of his house with legally obtained documents, Officer Wilson says. Kevin steps forward with his phone. Officers, I've been recording this entire interaction. Miss Anderson threatened legal action to prevent Mr. Morgan from taking public documents. Within minutes, what started as Diane calling police on her annoying neighbor became police questioning Diane about potential HOA violations. The tables hadn't just turned, they'd flipped loudly. Kevin was still recording. A teenage neighbor across the street was live streaming, and Diane. She was finally outnumbered by the truth. Sunday morning, I'm sitting on my cabin porch with coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up, and trying to process everything that happened yesterday. Word travels fast in small communities, and yesterday's police visit hasn't gone unnoticed. That evening, more porch lights stayed on than usual. Conversations at mailboxes lasted longer, quieter. You could feel the neighborhood exhaling like the first break in a long storm. I'm thinking maybe things will quiet down now, but honestly, I should have known that was just the beginning. The morning felt different somehow, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Mrs. Patterson approaches with her own coffee, looking like someone who's been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. "Nick, honey, what happened yesterday with all those police cars?" I explained the situation, simply no drama, just facts. Diane called police because I was moving with legally obtained HOA documents. "She called the police on you for moving?" Mrs. Patterson asks, and I can see her mind working through the implications. That's exactly what happened. Mrs. Patterson sits down heavily and says, "You know, she threatened to fine me last month because my roses were too colorful for the street view. I actually had to stop and stare at her after that one. Too colorful. What kind of person complains about flowers being too beautiful?" By midday, the door hadn't stopped knocking. Everyone had a version of the same story, different details, identical fear. It wasn't a problem. It was a pattern. Everyone had a story, and none of them were about real violations. Just fabricated control and HOA wrapping. Every story follows the same pattern, made-up rules, threats of fines, intimidation, tactics designed to control people's behavior on their own property. It was like listening to testimonials from abuse victims, except the abuse was bureaucratic harassment disguised as community leadership. Kevin arrives with a notebook, and I can tell he's been busy. "Nick, I've been talking to people. Want to see something interesting?" He's got a list not of legal violations, but of simple neighbor complaints about Diane's overreach, and it's longer than I expected. "How many people?" I ask. 12 houses so far. Same pattern everywhere, made up rules, fines that don't exist in the bylaws, threats of legal action. "Kevin, how long has she been HOA president?" 3 years. Want to know what's weird? Before she took over, there were hardly any violation complaints. Monday morning, Officer Wilson stops by, and I'm wondering if there's more trouble coming. "Mr. Morgan, we've had some additional calls about HOA practices in this neighborhood. Mind if I ask a few follow-up questions?" Turns out yesterday's incident prompted other residents to contact police about Diane's behavior. "Would you let sleeping dogs lie, or would you make sure everyone in the community knows exactly what's been happening?" "Officer, I'm not trying to cause trouble for anyone, but if you're asking whether Miss Anderson has been enforcing non-existent rules, the answer is yes," I tell him. "Can you provide documentation?" Kevin steps up with his folder. "We've got emails, violation notices, and financial records showing fines being collected for rules that don't exist in our HOA bylaws." Officer Wilson reviews Kevin's simple financial analysis. "Mr. Monroe, these numbers show significant discrepancies between collected fines and documented HOA expenses." "Right, we're paying for landscaping and road maintenance, but the bills don't add up to what's being collected." By Tuesday, Diane's in full damage control mode. She calls an emergency HOA meeting for Thursday night, and her email to all residents says, "Recent misunderstandings about HOA procedures require community clarification. Attendance mandatory." Mandatory. Even her damage control comes with threats, and I'm thinking she still doesn't understand that her intimidation tactics aren't working anymore. Wednesday evening, Kevin and I meet with interested neighbors at Mrs. Patterson's house, not to plan anything dramatic, just to share information. "All we want," says the gentleman from the corner house, "is for HOA rules to be actual rules, not Diane's personal preferences." We go through the original HOA bylaws together, and it turns out most people had never actually read them. "Look at this." The woman with the 2 kids points out, it says the HOA president serves a 1-year term renewable by community vote. When was the last time we voted? Kevin checks his notes. Never. She's just been continuing. The simple truth was staring us in the face. Diane hadn't been elected in 2 years. She'd been serving in a position she no longer legally held, enforcing rules she'd made up, collecting fines for violations that didn't exist. Thursday night, the community center is packed, and Diane's prepared a presentation about maintaining neighborhood standards and protecting property values. But the audience isn't the intimidated group she's used to controlling. The corner house neighbor raises his hand. "Diane, can you show us where in the bylaws it requires mailboxes to be specific colors?" Well, it's implied under general aesthetic guidelines. But where specifically? The woman with 2 kids follows up. "When was your last election? The bylaws say annual votes are required." Diane tries to maintain control. "These questions are inappropriate. I've been serving this community faithfully for 3 years." Mrs. Patterson's sweet 70-year-old. Mrs. Patterson stands up and says, "Diane, dear, you fined my grandson $25 for riding his bicycle on the sidewalk. Children ride bikes on sidewalks. That's normal." One by one, residents share their experiences. No theatrics, just timelines, names, violations. The truth didn't need drama, it carried weight on its own. Diane tries to fight back. All of these issues were handled according to proper procedures. Kevin stands up with his folder. "Diane, we've reviewed the procedures. Most of what you've been enforcing isn't in our bylaws." As the meeting continues, something important happens. The community stops being afraid of their HOA president. Not because of any dramatic confrontation, but because information is powerful and people are stronger together than alone. But Diane wasn't the type to fade. She'd retreat just far enough to reload, and I didn't know if the next strike would come with paperwork or something meaner. And I had a feeling this meeting wouldn't just decide Diane's fate, but reveal who else had been quietly helping her hold the reins. Friday morning, I get a certified letter, and my first thought is that maybe I've pushed this too far. Diane's hired a lawyer and is threatening to sue me for defamation of character and conspiracy to damage HOA leadership. Kevin gets the same letter, and so do the corner house neighbor and the woman with 2 kids. "She's trying to scare us into backing down," Kevin says, reading his copy. "But honestly, I'm wondering if this legal threat might actually have some teeth to it." But something interesting happens that I didn't expect. Instead of being intimidated, people get angry. By afternoon, Mrs. Patterson has organized a legal defense fund. The corner house neighbor has contacted a local attorney who specializes in HOA disputes. The woman with 2 kids has started a petition calling for Diane's immediate removal. The neighborhood that used to cower from Diane's threats is now actively fighting back. And I'm realizing that sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to back down to change everything. Monday morning, Officer Wilson arrives with paperwork, and I'm preparing for the worst. "Mr. Morgan, we've completed our review of the HOA situation. Given your FBI background and the evidence provided, Ms. Anderson has been issued citations for misuse of emergency services and operating an HOA without proper electoral authority." "What does that mean?" I ask. "It means she's been collecting fines and enforcing rules without being legally elected to do so. That's fraud." Turns out Diane's lawyer abandoned her case once he reviewed the actual HOA bylaws and saw the evidence Kevin had compiled. No legitimate attorney wants to defend someone who's been making up rules and collecting illegal fines. Tuesday evening, we have an emergency community meeting with a simple agenda vote on new HOA leadership and review all existing fines and violations. Diane arrives alone, no longer the confident queen of the neighborhood, and you can see she knows it's over. The new board formed quickly, not from ambition, but relief. No campaigns, just neighbors stepping up where Diane once stood alone. The vote is unanimous, well, almost. Diane votes against everything, but she's outnumbered 47-1. The financial review reveals exactly what we suspected. Diane had been collecting fines for non-existent violations and using the money for personal expenses. The good news, the woman with 2 kids announces, is that we can refund most of the inappropriate fines to residents. We're talking about over $15,000 collected illegally over 3 years. Makes you wonder what would happen if more people actually checked whether they're HO. Rules were real, doesn't it? Faced with financial accountability, potential criminal charges, and a community that no longer fears her, Diane announces she's moving out of state. Her final email to the community says, "This neighborhood has lost its commitment to excellence. I hope you're satisfied with the chaos you've created." Classic Diane, blaming everyone else for her own downfall, right until the very end. Over the next month, the community implements actual improvements, clear written guidelines based on legal requirements rather than personal preferences. Monthly financial transparency reports, annual elections for all HOA positions, an appeal process for any violations, and zero tolerance for harassment or intimidation. Kevin steps into a leadership role, naturally helping neighbors understand their actual rights and responsibilities. "You know what's funny?" he tells me one evening. "Most people want to maintain their properties and be good neighbors. We just needed rules that made sense." Mrs. Patterson plants a new flower garden, no longer worried about color violations. The corner house neighbor paints his mailbox the color he actually likes. The woman with 2 kids lets her children ride their bikes freely without fear of fines. The gravel road that once echoed with Diane's complaints now just sounds like a normal neighborhood, kids playing, neighbors chatting, life happening, without someone constantly looking over everyone's shoulder. 3 weeks after the moving day incident, I'm still here. Those empty boxes are stacked in my garage unused, because it turns out I don't need to move when the problem moves itself. I plant a new maple tree where the old one was butchered, and this one will grow without interference from anyone. This time I brought out a photo of my dad from the day I first showed him the cabin, buried it just beneath the roots. Let the tree grow from something that mattered. 6 months later, the neighborhood is thriving. Property values have actually increased. Turns out people like living in communities where they're treated like adults, not subjects. Kevin's become the unofficial community mediator, helping resolve disputes before they escalate. Diane moved to Arizona, and we heard she tried to become HOA president in her new community, but was voted down when residents researched her background. Sitting on my cabin porch this morning, watching Kevin help Mrs. Patterson with her garden, I realized the goal was never to destroy Diane or get revenge. The goal was to restore balance, to remind everyone that communities work best when power is shared, not HOA'd. Last week, a new family moved into Diane's old house, young couple with a baby. When they asked about HOA rules, Kevin handed them a simple, clear document explaining actual requirements. No threats, no made-up violations, no fear. Just neighbors, helping neighbors, understand how to live together peacefully. People ask me if I regret the confrontation, if I could have handled things differently. Here's the truth: bullies count on people avoiding confrontation. They thrive when good people choose peace over justice. Sometimes the most peaceful thing you can do is refuse to let someone abuse their power. The badge didn't scare her, the truth beneath it did, because it meant someone she couldn't bully was watching and wouldn't back down. This morning I'm watering my new maple tree when Kevin walks over with coffee for both of us. "You know what's crazy?" he says. "The neighborhood feels completely different now. Same houses, same people, but everything's lighter." He's right. When you remove the fear of arbitrary punishment, when people can trust that rules are fair and fairly applied, the whole community transforms. We stand there, two neighbors sharing coffee, watching our tree grow in soil that finally feels like home. And as we stood there, two neighbors, two coffees, one brand new tree, I realized something quiet had settled over the street. Not silence, not fear, just balance. No HOA letters in the mailbox, no one measuring fence lines with a ruler, just people finally remembering how to live next to each other without needing a rule book for it. Maybe the real lesson here isn't about badges or bylaws, but about what happens when you stop letting loud people rewrite the rules for everyone else. If you're still here, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Has your neighborhood ever had a Diane or a Kevin? Drop a comment, hit that. Like if this one hit close to home. And if you want to support the channel, you can always tap that little thanks button below. Thanks for hanging out.
Appreciate you sticking with us at QA Stories. Hit that bell so you never miss a moment, because things only get crazier from here.